fear that I had with coming out with a second book was, what if I mess it up, Liz? What if I give you less instead of more? So I promised myself that I wouldn't do that. I would just try and write a second book, which you now have, The Mystery Guest. And if I thought it didn't really, if it wasn't successful enough in my mind, no one else would have to see it.
Really? You were willing to do that?
Absolutely.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Good to see everybody. Thank you guys for coming out this evening. And thank you, Nita, for being here. This is so exciting.
Thank you, Liz, for asking me questions.
Yeah, we could be out there skating, but in here talking about books instead, which is terrific. And because we're in a library, and I think you probably know that at the end of Nita and I will talk, and then at the end there'll be time for some questions as well. So we're in this beautiful library, so I thought I would start off with a library question for you, because The Maid, your first book, was the most borrowed library book of 2022. And maybe some of you, yes.
Maybe some of you read copies from this library.
Yes, I did. I got my public lending right check today, so I was very excited.
Me too.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So what role did libraries play in your early life and indeed now?
Oh, libraries were formative for me. I did not grow up in that house with a great, lovely library and a masses of books. That's just not how I grew up. Wonderful parents, but they weren't readers. And I somehow was born unto them, like some strange castaway coming from God knows where. I was born to them, and I have always loved books. And so they were a place where I felt safe, where I could escape into the world of story. And, you know, I remember when I was in grade 2, I was not massive the way I am now. I was a very small child, very, very tiny. I was always the smallest kid in the class. And, you know, one day I got bullied or whatever, very lightly. I was teased, and I was very sensitive, so I was quite upset. And I remember going to the library, and the librarian looking at me and asking me what was wrong, and I told her what had happened. And instead of talking to me about that, she went into the stacks and she found a book. Oh. And she came over with the book and she sat me down and she read me the story. Oh. And it was incredible. I mean, this is what a librarian does. Librarians are amazing at this. She picked out a fable for me about a lion and a mouse. You will probably know the fable, where a lion gets caught in a net, and he's all caught up and he can't get out, and he's so powerful, but not in this moment. And a little tiny mouse comes and gnaws him out of the knots in the net and saves him. And that mouse then, of course, feels she has a purpose. She read me that story without saying a word about anything else, and I tell you, it was like I felt like a different human being. I felt so seen. And that is the magic of a good librarian and the magic of a good book.
Yeah.
At the right moment in time.
And you still remember her. And I still remember
do.
the one librarian who used to bring me stacks of Walter Farley books when I walked in the door. And she would have them waiting for me, the Black Stallion books. So they know us on a cellular level. It's a beautiful thing.
It is.
Thank you, librarians. And I wanted to ask you too, because you're not just an author, as you probably know, but Nita is also the handmaiden, I guess, of many, many, many other novelists' books in her previous incarnation as an editor. So second books are notoriously difficult for novelists. Did your experience as an editor help you at all in overcoming the challenges of a second novel?
Not even a little bit. If anything, it made me more acutely aware of how difficult the sophomore novel is, and the stress that burden on your shoulders when you have a second book coming out, it is a real thing. And even the publishers feel it, and you feel their stress, and everyone's freaked out. And I felt that really acutely. And the other thing I felt was, by this point, The Maid had been quite successful. Thanks to all of you wonderful readers out there, I felt I didn't own Molly anymore. I didn't feel like she was mine. I gave her away, and I gave her to you, and you've been taking care of her. Bless your hearts for doing so. But the fear that I had with coming out with a second book was, what if I mess it up, Liz? What if I give you less instead of more? So I promised myself that I wouldn't do that. I would just try and write a second book, which you now have, The Mystery Guest. And if I thought it didn't if it wasn't successful enough in my mind, no one else would have to see it.
Really? You were willing to do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. To bury it underneath.
It was like never going to come out of my computer file if I thought it was not up to snuff. But I had a real turning point. Like for me, for a while I was struggling. How do I write more Molly? This character grew a lot. She's in a different place when the second book begins. But I got one of those little gift of the God moments, and I bet you have some too. So you think of one you're going to tell us.
Okay.
Where I was on tour in the UK for The Maid, and I was visiting this museum outside of Brighton in a little town called Lewes, and it was a castle in the 17th century, and it had all been renovated. And I came across this display case, and inside it were the two strangest objects: the mummified body of a rat and a single silver spoon. And I thought, what the heck is this? Yeah. And I read the little description, and as it turns out, it was a memorial to a maid who'd once worked many hundreds of years ago in the castle. And she'd been unceremoniously dismissed after she'd been accused of stealing a silver spoon. Well, lo and behold, many, many years later, builders were renovating the castle. They opened up the walls, and they found a rat's nest. And in that rat's nest was this spoon and the mummified rat. And for some reason, that little tidbit, that little piece of ephemera, which was true to life, this is a true to life story. I didn't make it up for once. And it told me everything I needed to know about the tapestry for The Mystery Guest. I could almost hear Gran in my mind, Be careful what you assume. Nothing is ever as it seems, and the past is not going to stay buried forever. And somehow, with all of that sort of fairy tale universe, like an adult fairy tale land in my mind, I was able to go back and find a new trajectory, a new pathway, and a new narrative for Molly to traverse in book 2.
And it's also a good lesson for all you writers out there to get out of your offices and into the weird little museums and strange byways of this world.
Because to listen to those weird gifts of the gods. When you have that creative input, you have a little weird moment that somehow sticks in your brain, it's usually for a reason. Now, what is yours?
Oh, my one like that?
Yeah.
I'm sure I have one, and it'll probably come to me as we're sitting here. But I will tell you that my first novel, I had a moment where I was totally stuck over those particular point in the plot, and I could not think of anything. And it was literally in the shower when it came to me. And it was that classic kind of cliche, you're either showering or walking when the best ideas come to you. And sure enough, and it was just like, and I flung myself out of the shower, sopping wet, and like scribbled it down so that I didn't forget.
You had your eureka moment. It wasn't a bathtub, it was a shower, but it's modern times.
Modern times. Yeah. But I do visit a lot of museums, and I scribble down a lot of notes about like, oh, this could be a great story. This could be a great story.
Yes.
So, it is, you've described it as a mystery fairy tale hybrid. So just tell the audience a little bit more about how that worked.
Yeah, well, with the first book, the way I saw it, it was mystery on the one hand, but on the other hand, The Maid was also a feel-good story. I love the term that the Brits use for this. They call it uplifting literature. I wanted to see if I could write a murder mystery where there would be murder on the one hand, and you'd leave the book feeling a spirit of hope. Do those things go together very naturally? No, they do not. But I wanted to see if I could Frankenstein those two things together. And for me, I love cross-genre books that take a bit of this and that and try and create something new. And again, when I was coming to the mystery guest, well, I knew it was going to be another mystery. But the question was, what is the other genre that I'm going to bring in here? And I love those books, wonderful books that take you into the secrets of an old house.
Yes.
And where the house in itself becomes, you know, a metaphor for a character or for a way of being or for a feeling or mood or tone. And that sort of dark fairy tale element was something that I wanted to bring to the mystery this time around.
We won't tell you much more. If you haven't read the book yet, you'll see what the past. Gran is very much alive in this book, in the past and in the house with Molly. I also love how you play with the idea of invisibility. So you talked about how in the first book, I think, was sparked by this idea of stumbling across a maid who was tidying up your hotel room, and this idea of people who are normally kind of, we are at the forefront of our consciousness. I can't even, that word, plural.
You're allowed to make words up. It's all fine.
Conscious eye. And it reminds me a little bit of also what Richard Osman is doing in the Thursday Murder Club but with seniors who are also sometimes a group who get neglected or overlooked. So why was it important to kind of highlight this idea of the invisible people in the world?
Well, you know, I don't know about you, Liz, but when...
Are you going to say middle-aged lady? Is that the next?
I sure am. How did you know?
I can't even see you, Nita. Where are you?
I don't know. It's all blurry over there. You know, there's a real reckoning, I think, that women come to, probably in their 5th decade, certainly for me, where there's a certain invisibility that happens to you. You're there, but you're not seen anymore. And it's liberating on the one hand. In some ways, that can be extremely liberating. But in other ways, it can feel like a departure from various other moments of your life. So there was that. But there is also the worker, the unseen worker. You know, the person who toils away, particularly in hotels or restaurants, in the background, who sometimes we forget to acknowledge. I think we learned during the pandemic just how important those people are to the very fabrics and workings of our society. We cannot function without them. And we've learned that. Let's hope we don't unlearn that. Hopefully that's one of the lessons that stays with us. But I wanted to really invest in the character of the maid and seat the author or the reader behind Molly's eyes to experience life as her and to see what it would be like to have a job like that where she's obsessive and loves cleaning, but she's unseen in a lot of profound ways. Sometimes that can be a blessing, and of course, sometimes that can be a curse.
And it wasn't until you just talked about being bullied as a child that it occurred to me that maybe that's a connection too with Molly, who is and has been overlooked her entire life. And there's something, I have a child who's on the autism spectrum, and I know you very deliberately have not, and understandably have not said, you know, Molly's this or she's that, kind of in the same way that the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime, Mark, oh my God,
Haddon.
Thank you, never said it either. But you make Molly so strong in so many ways, but also somebody who doesn't fit into the normal educational system, for example.
Yeah.
So she's a lifelong learner, but she's not somebody who does particularly well at school.
Yeah.
And what was that kind of, what were you trying to get at with this idea of her being somebody who teaches herself essentially all along her lifespan? Yeah,
well, she's a unique character for sure, and you're right. I was really reticent to label her, and that's something I thought about at the beginning a lot. But what I didn't want you as readers to do was to pick up the copy of a book, look at the description on the back, and for her to be labeled in a certain way. Because I worried that some readers would see her as other. Oh, this isn't me, this is somebody different, this is not me at all. What I wanted you to do is live as Molly, and my hope was that if I did things right, you would come to love her. Many years ago, before I worked in publishing, before I was an editor, I worked as a special needs teacher, and I taught teenagers. And it was a formative and incredible time of my life. And I loved these kids, and they drove me mental. But I adored them. And one of the things we used to do was just go out on field trips. And by field trips, I don't mean like going to a museum or something. We'd go on really little field trips. Sometimes we'd just go to the donut store across the street. And the more we did this, the more I realized we weren't actually doing this for the students. We were doing it for everybody else. And that is because it became very clear to me that these kids, despite really small, to me they seemed very small differences. Some of them might have had, verbal tics or physical tics. I had another kid who loved to carry around newspapers. Carrying around yesterday and the day before made him feel safe. So everywhere he went, he had newspapers or subway transfers. And he couldn't be without them. But most people, when you're out and about in the world, treated these kids really great, except for the people who didn't. And those people I never forgot. And they were often adults, they weren't young people, and they didn't seem to me to have many excuses for not having empathy, understanding, and compassion for people with minor differences. But something I observed and I learned from these kids, so often I felt like I was the student and they were my teachers, was watching them lead with resilience. They had this grace about them, despite being the subjects of extreme prejudice sometimes. And they just withstood, and they grew bigger and brighter and better as human beings. And that sort of light I never forgot. And while I was writing Molly, I wasn't really aware of what I was doing until I was finished the book. But what I think I did was I took all of the best qualities of all of those students and I gave them all to a single character.
Yeah.
As an homage to those kids.
She has such a sense of justice.
Yes, she
And
does.
wanting things to be right, not just to the orderliness of the room, but also the orderliness of the world. And I remember once I interviewed P.D. James, and she said, that's what mystery stories do for us. They take a messy world, and they very momentarily impose order on it, which makes us go like, it's going to be okay.
Yes, that is very true. When we get to the end of that, there's a feeling that justice is served in some kind of way.
Yeah.
And that feeling of closure is really satisfying.
So if you can imagine a world in which things work out okay, it gives you some kind of relief.
Right.
And I love the character of Gran, too. And she says in this book, and she goes through a lot, I'm not going to tell you what, you will read and see. She says, stories are a way to walk 100 miles in someone else's shoes, which is very true. Teaches us empathy as well as, entertaining us. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your mother, because you said, I think your mother was a nurse?
Yes.
Yeah, my mother was also a nurse and a teller of tales. Yours was as well, but your mother was a teller of tall tales.
Yes.
And it informed your craft in a certain way. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think of my mother in some ways being very much like Gran. Gran is the tidier version. She's very neat and staid and has a sort of English sensibility. My mother was French-Canadian, loud, exuberant, and she loved to tell tall tales. She could not tell a story that made sense. And when I was young, now I've gotten used to this, but when I was young, it drove me crazy. I couldn't stand it. So she used to tell stories, about growing up in northern Quebec and how, a woman went out on the ice one day and she fell in the water. Everyone thought she was dead. 2 days later, she comes out. She has different color hair and she's speaking in a funny tongue. Mom, that can't be true. It is true. It happened. I was there. So she would tell stories like this all the time, and it would infuriate me. It would make me crazy. And she told this one story about a pig that she insisted that she rode to school. So, yeah. And I'd be like, Mom, that can't be true. That is a total fabrication. Why cannot it be true? Well, because it's ridiculous. And she would go on telling me about the pig and how popular it was, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, A few years ago, my mother died. And my aunt, who is a very no-nonsense person, very direct, not a teller of tall tales, I decided to ask her about this pig. And my mom had always called it you get. And so I said, you know, Aunt Suzanne, like, this probably bothered you too about Mom. Like, she used to tell these stories that were outrageous, and she'd expect you to believe it. You know, she once told me about riding a pig to school when she was a kid. It can't be true. She's like, you mean you get? And I'm like, what are you you get is real? She's like, oh, yes. Well, we grew up on a farm, and the snow was deep, and your mother trained a pig. And yes, she rode it to school every day, and it was very popular with the students, but not so much with the teachers. And that's when I learned something too late about the power of what she was doing. That sometimes there is a truth in fiction that is so much more relevant than fact. And that she understood intuitively. And it is a gift that I have in me. It's in my blood. It's in my DNA. It's in my ability to write fiction. And she gave that to me. And I cry every time I think about it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to tell her,
thank
you. You know, so now I tell all of you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
My mom also died a few years ago, and her stories all came from St. Michael's Hospital. So they were
Oh boy.
tall tales in a whole other way. She would regale us with these stories over, dinner and things, and we'd all just be like, "Oh, stop! Like, it's too much."
Yeah, my mother used to do that too.
Yeah,
And she was very well aware that it grossed the rest of us out.
yeah. But look what it did. It turned us
Well, this
into
is it.
bloodthirsty mystery writers.
I know. See, it's perfect, but you realize these things too late.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, so appreciate your parents if they're here, is all I will say. Did you love mysteries as a child? Were you a mystery reader?
I'm an omnivore. I love mysteries. I love anything. If you put a cereal box in front of me, I'd read every word on it.
Right.
So yes, I do love mysteries, but it's not all I read. I like to read a little bit of everything. And certainly when I was an editor, I've only recently stopped editing, but I love to edit many things at the same time. A thriller over here, and a memoir over here, and a political book, and a celebrity memoir. Give it to me all.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love being able to read a bit of everything, and hopefully write a bit of everything eventually too.
Were there any mystery writers you particularly love? Or I guess the question is, did you read? I find it really hard to read for anything but pleasure, unless I'm actually reading a nonfiction book, which I'm writing about. So it's hard for me to read for mechanics, but you're an editor too.
Yeah.
So are you always looking at mechanics, or?
I'm very aware of mechanics, certainly on a second read. And for any of writers or aspiring writers out there, I think that one of the best things you can do to learn the craft of writing is to reread. And the second time you're reading, you don't read for your own entertainment. You read to understand the mechanisms that writers like us use to tell their stories. And that can be really a powerful tool and a training tool to motivate your own writing.
Could it also be stifling, I'm wondering? Like when you're writing, you have to really liberate yourself to write what Anne Lamott calls the shit first draft, famously.
Yes.
In her wonderful book, Bird by Bird.
Oh, it's a great book.
It's a great book on writing, for any of you who want a great book on writing. So could you liberate yourself from that kind of somebody who knew all the mechanisms to just write as messily as you wanted to?
I think I'm a combination messy writer with technique. So I'm looking for those moments of inspiration or a scene that's going to fulfill me, but as soon as I'm done that, I'm lost again. And when you're lost as a writer, you need a toolkit, and my toolkit is craft. That's what I return to over and over again when I don't know what to do. When I get to a moment or a character or a scene where I'm like, I don't know, I've forgotten what I'm doing, then I go back to craft. And so I bounce back and forth between that sort of pure inspiration and that search of, asking myself a lot of questions. What is the function of the scene? What does the character want here? How does the story move forward? If I know this is going to happen later, then what's the in-between that I need here? And somehow that yin and yang of sort of intuition and, real craft of narrative come together for me. So that's the magic.
So you're a plantser.
I'm a plantser.
So in writing, you may know, it's kind of artificially divided among novelists into plotters and pantsers. People who fly by the seat of their pants and people who very diligently plot. And I think what Nita's saying is she's a plantser, so like half and half.
I'm a half and half.
Okay.
So I always know the twists in my book. I know those very early on, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. I have no idea. And it's that yin and yang of knowing and not knowing that for me is really fertile ground.
I was always amazed at how many novelists I interviewed who started with the last scene in their heads, and I never have been able to do that. How about you?
I can do that. I know a couple of pivotal moments near the end. What I don't know is the beginning.
Okay.
And I am very envious of writers who can do that, or who don't need to plot at all. Liz Nugent, the Irish writer, how she begins a book, she doesn't plot at all. She doesn't have ideas for characters. She has a voice and one single line. And then she just keeps writing. I can't even imagine that world where you wouldn't think ahead, where you wouldn't have certain constructs that drive the engine of the book. I'm very envious, but I think like a writer like that has such an innate, intuitive sense of craft that she doesn't have to think about it. Lisa Jewell is another one who writes that way.
And Hilary Mantel, again, I interviewed Hilary Mantel, and she told me sort of my favorite living writer until she died, but still one of my favorite modern writers.
Yeah.
And she told me that for Wolf Hall, for all 3 books, started with just the line, "So now get up," which is the first line.
Yeah.
Which Thomas Cromwell's father says to him, and occurs again, not spoiler alert, because it happened 500 years ago. It happens at the end of the last book as well. But amazing that can spring from one line or one...
I find it incredible.
But in your case,
I envy it.
It sprang from this scene of seeing a maid in your hotel room. So the most incredible things can be inspirations. That's true.
Yeah, and for me, I get those from time to time. I call them the lightning bolt moments, like I mentioned that in that museum. And, in that room with the maid, I wasn't planning to be a writer. I love editing. I loved working as an editor. And, the door opened of my I opened the door of my hotel room, and a maid was cleaning it. And I shocked her, I startled her, and the embarrassing part is she was holding my track pants, which were sweaty and disgusting because I'd very quickly changed after going for a run in the morning and left them in a tangled mess on my bed. She's holding them, trying to fold them all neatly. She's looking at me as I come in the room. I'm looking at her, and I think to myself, oh my goodness, it is such an intimate and invisible job to be a roommate. She'd been cleaning my room for days. She knew everything about me.
Yeah.
She knew the makeup I wore, the clothes I wear, where I was going, when I was coming back, everything, and I knew nothing about her.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that little moment, just a little moment where we didn't exchange words, it stuck in my head. And later, a few days later on my plane ride home, I started to hear a voice in my head, and it wasn't my voice, it was a different voice entirely, and it was crisp and clean and polished and precise. Do you have any idea who it might be? It's not me. And I started to write what I was hearing, and I didn't even have paper, so I grabbed the napkin from under my drink, and I started to write that voice, and that became the prologue for The Maid.
What a gift.
It was a very strange moment, another gift from the gods.
And now it's become this phenomenon. There's a movie in the works.
Yep.
And are you interested at all in screenwriting, or?
I am fascinated by screenwriting, but I know what I do not know. And I do not know how to screenwrite. It's such a parallel art to what we do, and yet so very different. So no, I'm not writing the script. Somebody else has done that, and they've done a beautiful job. And yeah, Universal has the rights to the Maid, and I'm really hoping that now that all the strikes are over in Hollywood land, we'll be seeing it on the silver screen sometime.
Yes,
in the
I
near
certainly
future.
hope so too. And I believe Florence Pugh is attached.
She is attached. Let's hope it stays that way. I
Yes.
think she'd be a killer Molly.
Yes, she would. She's a real talent. And I have to ask you whether Molly will come back again. I know, for example, especially with mystery writers, there's fans have such devotion to these characters that Agatha Christie kept having to bring Poirot back, and
Yes.
Arthur Conan Doyle most famously had to bring Sherlock Holmes back.
Under dubious circumstances.
Under very dubious circumstances, and maybe never quite as wonderful. But what do you feel like you have? I'm not going to ruin it for you, but there's a sense of maybe a transition in the book. Is there more Molly for you to talk
There
about?
is more Molly. In fact, there's going to be more Molly coming this year.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah. So, oh, thank you. Thank you. You'll tell me if I did okay, please, if you read it. So it's a holiday novella, and it'll come out probably in October. And it's a very different kind of mystery this time because it's holidays at the Regency Grand, and Molly is thinking of her gran, and she misses her very much. But her life with Juan Manuel is going really well, except Juan Manuel keeps acting a little bit strange.
Ooh.
He's coming and going at strange times. He's full of weird excuses, and she just doesn't know what to make of it anymore. And she starts to wonder if she has done it again, if she's chosen a frog instead of a prince. But there are jingle bells ringing like crazy, and let me just say that Molly is about to get the best holiday gift of her entire life. But she doesn't know it.
Oh, okay, that's totally intriguing.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Regency Grand, did you ever draw a map of the hotel for yourself?
Oh, I have it in my head. It's so vivid. But what I really love is that readers have it in their heads. And I love to listen to readers describe the place. Very often readers will come up to me and say, like, where is this set? Like, you never really quite say.
I was going to ask you about that, yes.
Yeah. And, readers will say, I imagined it being London. I thought maybe the Baglioni, we stayed there last year. And I'll be like, yes, absolutely, you are right. And then another reader will come up to me and say, yeah, I thought it was New York. I thought maybe the Waldorf Astoria. And I say, yes, you're correct. And I will say that as many times as necessary because to me, the reader is everything. I don't see myself as a solo creator. I write what I put down on the page, and then my job is done. And then it's your job. You complete the picture. You take over the creative process. You finish the bare outlines of what I've put on the page and the characters, and you finish it for me. And whatever you imagine, it just absolutely delights me that you and I could participate in the completion of this world together. And that to me is the greatest compliment you could give me, is when you imagine what Molly looks like, or you imagine a certain place, a hotel, whatever, because that means that you were engaged, in this creation with me.
And in many ways, the setting is the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
The New York or the London is the hotel, because it is such a place peopled with a set of characters and very distinctive physical features, and which, as you say, you can totally imagine. It's like Gormenghast or something much nicer, but it's like you can picture it in your head, and that becomes the village because in a mystery, the setting is so important.
Right. Well, where did you think it was?
I thought it was London.
There you go. She's right.
I used to live in London. I knew it. I used to live in London, and I thought, it kind of seems like the Savoy a little bit.
Oh, sure, that would be
set
perfect.
along the river there, and
Yeah.
with a doorman, and
I love it.
yeah, could be. Was it important to you to have Molly? You isolate her from Juan Manuel for a while.
Yeah.
So was it important for her development? Do you think to have? Yeah.
You know, in the first book, Molly is learning to live life without Gran, and Gran was a navigational force, a compass for her, who taught her how to be, how to exist in the world, how to navigate social cues. And so she has to go through a real journey of growth in that first book, which only takes place in a period of a week. She learns so quickly, so fast. And by the time we meet her in the second book, it's a few years later, and she's grown exponentially. She's a head maid. She's much more secure in herself. But I had to ask myself as a writer, what's the journey of growth? How does she grow yet again? And like in real life, when we know ourselves, and only when we know ourselves, can we then have any energy to expend on understanding other people. We can grow compassion for others and empathy for others when we know who we are, when we feel a sense of self and confidence in who we are and a sense of belonging. And the Molly we meet in the second book has a very different journey of growth. Now that she's much more settled with Juan Manuel away, she's able to think more about her Gran, to go back to memories of her past when she was just a little girl and discover all of the sacrifices her Gran did for her in order for her to thrive and to be well in the world. And in order for me to do that, Juan had to be a little outside. Now he's coming back in book 3, don't worry, he's all over the place.
Although he's really up to something.
Up to something funny. But yeah, so he had to be outside of that so she could go another journey of growth.
You seem to also be having a lot of fun with not just mystery writers. The main character in the book, I'm not giving anything away, is one of the main characters, a mystery writer. But also there's this fantastic little cabal of super fans called the Lambs, who are very, very interesting. So tell me what you wanted to kind of explore there.
I am a lamb, first of all.
Okay.
So in the book, there's this group of aficionados of murder mysteries, and they call themselves the Lambs, Ladies Auxiliary Mystery Book Society. And they are absolutely fanatic about the works of J.D. Grimthorpe, a very famous writer in the book. And I imagine myself as one of them. I could very well be one of these ladies. They take it to an extreme. They want to know everything about this author, every last thing. They follow him around a hotel when he's about to make a big speech and announcement about his future, which he never makes because he dies. Yes, he dies. Very, very dead, as Molly would say. That is not a spoiler because it happens very early on in the book. And it's not really about his death. It's about something entirely else.
Yeah. So tell me, who are your lambs? Which lambs follow you around?
Oh, no, I don't have, my fans are hardly that rabid. Thank goodness. My fans are lovely, like these people here.
Who would you be super
who would I fangirl?
Standing over, as the kids
like Marilyn Robinson, if she walked in a room, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I'd probably start to pace and pant and sweat a lot. She might be somebody who I would have a real hard time approaching.
There was a
definitely
brilliant
one of my idols.
interview with her in the New York Times just like a day or two
Oh, really?
ago.
Oh, I haven't seen it. I'll check it out.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It was sort of about spirituality in the modern world, and she seems kind of fed up with what's happened.
Well, she always was, but she was able to write her way to hope.
Yeah.
In a way that is magnetic, and her books are so magnetic.
Yeah.
Who would you fangirl over?
Well, Hilary Mantel was it for me.
Yes.
And then I met her, and she was just everything I could have imagined. I interviewed her twice, and she was delightful. And P.D. James also. I had such a girl crush on her. I can't even tell you. It was embarrassing. But yeah, so I've been able to meet, fortunately, that was.
Yeah.
Have you met Marilyn Robinson or no?
No.
Yeah.
I would be a mess. It would not go well because I would be a stuttering fool.
Well, you would be in good company because she says in this New York Times article that she actually stopped writing to Barack Obama. I was like, what? He did something that pissed her off. I won't ruin it for you. Read the interview.
Oh my goodness, I can't wait.
And she stopped writing to him, and I thought, you are so steely and awesome. I love you. But yeah, anyway.
She ghosted Barack Obama.
Yeah, she ghosted Barack Obama. I know. You gotta love, I think, it's true. You reach 81 and you're Marilyn Robinson, and you just don't need to.
Yep.
You can
Lives
be
by her
whoever
own
you want to
rules.
be.
Absolutely.
And ghost whoever you want to ghost. Is there other, so you just mentioned, we only have time for a couple more questions before the audience part starts, but you said you wanted to write other things. Are there other genres, or do you want to write nonfiction as well, or?
I think I want to stay in the world of fiction for a bit. And I can imagine stepping outside of mystery. I don't even see myself really as a mystery writer. I think of myself more of a voice-driven writer where the character is everything. Character supersedes everything. That's why the book isn't my books are not police procedurals. If you read them like that, you will be frustrated because there's a hyper-reality about the world and the characters that doesn't try to mimic reality. You know, it's a little bit more like a Wes Anderson film. So I can imagine taking that idea and, again, Frankensteining something else to it. So taking a character or a set of characters and exploring them deeply, but with a different genre attached. I don't know what that will be, because at the moment I'm with Molly. I'll be with her for this novella and for one closing big book after that, and then that series will be closed. And then I will move on to discovering some new characters.
But possibly open to revisiting Molly at some point in the future, maybe? Who
We'll
knows?
see. I'm not going to bury her in the ground. Like, I'm not going to pull a Sherlock Holmes.
Even if you
and then,
threw
like,
her off the Rickenback Falls, she would still come back. So, or James Bond died in the last movie, but you know he's coming back.
He's coming back.
So
We all know he's coming
he's
back.
coming back. I'm also really interested in craft questions. We may have some writers in the audience. So I just wanted to ask you a couple quick ones before we wrap up. So what is your writing routine like?
You know, I wake up really early. I like it to start work when it's dark, usually at 5 o'clock, maybe a little later these days, but not very much. There's a certain peace at that time of day. I find my demons are still sleeping. Like, my demons sleep in, but I'm awake. So, you know those little voices, those little gremlins, that's terrible. You can't write. That's a stupid scene, bad character. All of those little gremlins are still asleep. They're not getting up for a couple hours, and I have freedom. I can dance at that hour. And there's no pinging emails and texts coming in. There's a certain quiet, and I feel a little closer to dreams. I feel close to a world that is somatic. And I'm able to work that into my writing in a way that feels more fluid and natural, and that escapes me later in the day.
So you wouldn't, for example, look at your phone when you get up. You will just go to the computer and...
Sometimes I will.
Yeah.
You know, I might have some coffee and some toast or whatever, and then I will go. But somehow I'm still close to that dream state.
Yeah.
And there's something liminal about that time of day where I can borrow from the land of dream.
Yeah. Because there is, as you say, this...
Sounds so insane
No,
when I
it's not.
say it out loud.
Well, it doesn't, though, because there's no other place to access that voice or that creativity, because then the world crashes in.
It
and,
does.
And panic about the world crashes in.
Yeah.
And your family and your friends and your partners and your pets and everything just...
That's
and
right.
So you do need this...
You need to find that time and space. Some writers find it at night,
Yeah.
and I find it early in the morning.
And do you do many drafts? Are you a many draft person, or are you...
I do one big draft at the beginning, and I am drafting and drafting and drafting a chapter until I get it right. So usually my first draft is really my 23rd draft in a lot of ways.
So you're the Zadie Smith type of...
I am, yes.
So
I
she
know what you mean.
famously can't write until she gets her first chapter perfect.
I do a lot of that.
Yeah.
Because that really helps me know what to do next. I'm not the Lisa Jewell writer. I'm not I can't sit down in front of a blank page and just, it's going to come to me intuitively. No. Some things will, but some things won't. So yeah.
And do you have, I guess I'll just ask as a last question, I view you kind of as I don't want to say unicorn, because that diminishes your incredible hard work and talent, but it is... You caught lightning in a bottle, I think. You know, you had this huge success, and so people maybe don't quite understand how much actual sweat and dirt, wrestling is involved with books. Do you have advice for anybody who's struggling with a first draft or writing a first draft of a novel?
If you are wrestling, and if it's difficult and challenging, and you're pulling your hair out and you think you're awful, good for you. You're doing something right. If none of that is true, you're probably not on the right track. Writing is, by its very nature, difficult, challenging when you're doing it right. And, you know, it's a craft. It's something, you know, or it's a little bit like exercise. You have to build muscle over time, and the same is true with writing muscle. So if you keep at it, and you're disciplined, and you sweat through this tough stuff, you're going to come out pretty powerful on the other side.
That is very good advice. And write 300, what was it, Carly Fortune said, write 300 words a day, and in a year you have a book.
Correct.
You have a first draft.
Correct.
So
It might
300
not be a
words is
good
not a
draft,
lot.
but you'll have something.
You'll have something.
And that's okay. That's
Something to
how you
work
can
on.
start.
And you can, I don't know who, maybe it was Anne Lamott who said it as well, but somebody said, you can rewrite shit, but you can't rewrite nothing.
Correct. So sometimes you just got to take the plunge. And
Yeah.